Is there purpose to our pain? Hi, my name is Michael Otts and I'm an author and speaker. And in my travels around Europe, as I speak to university students, this question of suffering is probably the one that comes up more than any other. And of course, there's a good reason for that. It doesn't matter where we live or when we live, we can't escape the reality of suffering. It is universal. And perhaps in the last 12 months, we've been forced to ask this question in a way that we've never asked it before. We've seen not only the physical pain and suffering that's been caused by coronavirus, but we've felt the emotional and mental pain of the impact of lockdown and our reaction to it. All of us have been affected, none of us have been able to escape it. And when we're confronted by suffering and pain, it forces us to ask questions like, why? Why is the world the way it is? Is there any purpose to what happens to us, or is it just meaningless? And ultimately, the way that we answer those questions depends on our worldview, our beliefs. If our worldview and belief system says there is no God, then consistently speaking, we'd have to come to the conclusion that says, actually, these things are ultimately pointless. There is no overriding reason or meaning to them. One atheist writer put it this way. He said, the universe we observe has precisely the properties we'd expect if there's no design or purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Ultimately, this is just the way the world is. We shouldn't be upset about it. It's just the way it is. Some people get lucky, some people get hurt. And actually, it's probably because we find that answer dissatisfying that in the reality, in the face of suffering, many people, rather than embracing atheism, turn away from it. They actually start to look at religion, maybe for the first time in their life, and to ask questions about whether religion has answers to this issue of suffering. And different religions will give you different answers. Many Eastern religions will give this idea of karma, that suffering is somehow the direct consequence of things that we've done in our lives or a previous life. And that might help us when we think about suffering that's happening in another part of the world or to other people. But does it actually help us when we're suffering to know that it's just a punishment? And does it actually remove the motivation to act with compassion to others who are suffering if ultimately they deserve it? Islam will tell us that everything that happens is the will of Allah. Our job is to submit to it. That's what the word Islam means. And while it might give us some comfort to think, well, yeah, okay, there is some overriding purpose, does it also encourage a fatalistic attitude in the face of suffering? If everything that happens is the will of Allah, then should I intervene to try and stop people from suffering when they are? If that's intervening with what God has willed? Well, how does Christianity answer this question? What I want to say is that in many ways, Christianity agrees and disagrees with what we've already heard. On the one hand, Christianity does say there is a degree of futility about the world in which we live. In one of the New Testament books in the Bible, a book called Romans, we read that the creation, the universe, has been subjected to futility. We look at the world and we see suffering and injustice, and we have this sense that it shouldn't be that way. And the Bible says exactly, it shouldn't. Something has gone wrong and the world we live in is not the way it once was. I remember standing by the grave of a friend, and as I saw this guy who was younger than me be buried, I thought to myself, it shouldn't be this way. And the Christian faith says, I'm absolutely right to think that way because it shouldn't. Something's gone wrong. Our reaction to the futility and injustice of life is anger and frustration, and it's absolutely right that it's that way if the Bible's true. But also, as we look for answers to our suffering, Christianity doesn't just tell us that the world we live in has gone wrong, but it also tells us wonderfully that there is hope, that one day it can be put right. In that same part of the Bible, we read that the creation that we live in is suffering the pains of childbirth. That's an interesting analogy to use, isn't it? But it's significant. If you were to walk around a hospital, there is a real difference, isn't there, to the pain that is experienced in the maternity wards to the pain that is experienced in the oncology wards. In the former, that pain is real, but it is pain that has hope and new life attached to it. And the Bible says the suffering of our world and the suffering of our lives can be pain that is tinged with hope. The hope that says that although our world is not the way it once was, it is not the way it one day will be. is the hope that the Bible holds out that one day this world will be restored. Christian salvation isn't about escaping this physical world to some spiritual dimension. It's about the renewal, the transformation of this entire world. There is hope in the face of pain. But also, Christianity says there can be purpose to be found in our pain as well. Again, in that part of the Bible, we read that God is able to work in all things for good. Now, it's not saying that all things are good. There are plenty of things in this world that are absolutely not good. But God is big enough to work through the mess, the pain, and the injustice of our world for good, and for our good if we know and trust Him. That's an incredible thought, that God can have purposes. Now, what are they? We don't always know. It might be that He's developing our character through the things that we've experienced, and certainly often it is painful experiences of life that can form and shape us to become better people rather than bitter people. But ultimately, the Bible says our suffering should also point us towards what God is like and remind us of who He is. See, the Christian faith doesn't paint a God who is absent or distant from our suffering world, but it tells us of a God who became part of our suffering world, who stepped into our shoes, as it were. The Bible says that Jesus, as God, experienced the full range of human suffering, injustice, abandonment, isolation, and ultimately physical death by Roman crucifixion. He suffered with us. He knows what it's like. But the Bible also says He suffered for us. He was taking the ultimate consequences of the things that we've done so that we might not have to, so that we might have a relationship with God restored, so that we might have the hope of being with Him in a world made new. And that can give us real comfort and real hope in the midst of this so often unfair and painful world in which we live. Look, these are big questions and I've only skirted the surface of them. So why not join us tonight? At 7:30 we'll be having a live discussion. We'd love you to be there as we discuss these issues in more detail. But also, why not send us your questions? Not only will we send you an answer to your question, we'll also send you a treat as well. So do get in touch. We'd love to be able to talk further about these really important questions.